I woke up to the loudest knock I had ever heard in my life. It was 6 in the morning, still dark, and my heart jumped because nobody knocks that early unless something is wrong. I pulled on a sweatshirt, walked to the door, and when I opened it, my landlord stood there with his fist raised like he was ready to bang again. His face was pale. His voice shook when he said, "Do not drink your tap water today." I stared at him, confused and half asleep. Why? What happened? He looked straight at me and said, "You will see on the news soon. Please listen." That was when I knew this was not a joke. My landlord, Darvin Holt, barely ever talked to anyone. He never showed emotion, but that morning he looked scared, really scared. I felt my chest tighten, because you can fake a lot of things, but you cannot fake fear. I had no idea what was coming at 9:14 that morning, but when the city alert went off, everything he said made sense. This warning was the start of one of the most frightening days of my life. My name is Nora Kesslin, and I live alone in a small third-floor apartment in Milwaukee. The building is old, the walls creak when the heat turns on, and the stairs shake a little when someone heavier walks by. It is not perfect, but it is what I can afford. Before that day, my life felt slow and predictable. I worked at a local bookstore that stayed quiet most of the time. I liked the peace, but sometimes the silence made me feel invisible. Most of my family lived across town, but I had not visited them in months. My relationship with them was strained, especially with my father. He always told me I was too dramatic or too worried about things that did not matter. Eventually, I got tired of being dismissed, so I moved out. Living alone came with a mix of freedom and loneliness. Some days I enjoyed the quiet. Other days I wished I had someone to talk to, but nothing in my routine prepared me for the warning I got that morning. Usually, I start my day by brushing my teeth, drinking a glass of tap water, and making a sandwich to take to work. When Darvin showed up at my door, everything inside me froze. I felt caught between fear and confusion. I kept asking myself why a man like him would show up at 6 in the morning to warn me about something so specific. I tried calling my mother, but she was already at work and barely had time to talk. My sister texted back saying, "Your landlord is weird. He's probably overreacting." Their reactions made me feel even more alone, standing in my kitchen, staring at the faucet like it was a loaded gun. The whole building felt tense. I could hear doors opening and closing softly, like everyone was scared to make noise. My neighbor Janet knocked on my door and whispered, "Did he warn you too?" Her voice shook. That was when I realized something was really wrong. I kept looking at the sink. Something so normal suddenly felt dangerous. Every instinct in me said to stay alert and trust the fear I felt building inside my stomach. I did not know what was coming next, but I could feel the day shifting into something I would never forget. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. After Janet left my doorway, the quiet inside my apartment felt heavier than before. I could not shake the feeling that something terrible was happening, something bigger than a simple plumbing issue. I stood in my kitchen for a long minute, staring at the faucet while my heartbeat thudded in my ears. My routine was simple: water, breakfast, work, but now even a glass of water felt like a threat. I walked toward the window and pulled up the blinds. The street looked normal at first, but as I watched longer, I noticed an unusual stillness. No joggers passing by, no kids walking to school, not even the early bus rumbling down the road. The world felt paused, like everyone was holding their breath. I stepped back when I saw 2 police cruisers roll slowly down the street. They stopped near the building across from mine. 2 officers got out and began knocking on doors with a sense of purpose that sent a shock through my stomach. Something was wrong, something big. I grabbed my phone and tried calling my mother again, but she declined the call because she was in a morning meeting. I sent her a text telling her to avoid the tap water, but she replied with a short message that said, "I am sure it is nothing. I have been drinking it all morning." That was the moment I wanted to scream. My family never took my warnings seriously, and now it felt like that same habit was putting them at risk. I texted my sister next, hoping she would respond with more urgency, but she wrote back, "You worry too much. The landlord is probably dealing with a broken pipe or something. Relax. Her comment hit the same sore spot my father had pressed for years. It made me feel small again, like the anxious kid who always imagined worst-case scenarios. But this time, I knew my fear was real. I placed my phone down and paced the apartment. The sound of my footsteps felt too loud. I kept replaying the look on Darvin's face. It was not annoyance or confusion. It was fear. Pure fear. That alone made my skin crawl. I peeked into the hallway, and several tenants were doing the same. Their doors cracked open just enough for one eye to look out. No one wanted to step into the hall. We were all waiting for something, even though none of us knew what that something was. The tension was thick enough to taste. I heard footsteps approaching, and when I turned, I saw Officer Reynolds, a familiar police officer who usually patrolled the neighborhood, walking down the hallway of the building across from mine. Seeing him made my chest tighten because he only showed up when a situation was serious. Minutes later, a loud alert tone blasted from someone's phone down the hall. It was not the real city alert yet, just a reminder for an unrelated test planned for later that afternoon. But the sound was enough to make my stomach twist. My nerves were stretched thin, and every small noise felt like an alarm. I tried turning on the television to see if the news was reporting anything, but the morning anchors were busy talking about light rain and traffic backups. Not a word about the water. That silence made everything feel even more dangerous. If something was wrong, why was there no warning yet? Why was the city so quiet? Why was my landlord the only one who seemed to know? My breathing grew tight. I walked back to the kitchen and forced myself to sit down at the table. The faucet kept catching my eye. I felt like a frightened animal watching a predator, waiting for the moment it decided to strike. Every instinct in my body said to stay away from that sink. I considered going downstairs to talk to Darvin again, but fear held me in place. What if the problem was already in the air or spreading somehow? What if leaving my apartment made things worse? I pressed my hands together and tried to calm myself, but it felt impossible. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I heard another loud banging noise from the hallway. This time it was Darvin shouting with a raised voice I had never heard before. "Stay inside until officials arrive. Do not leave your apartment." His footsteps were fast, his tone intense. The urgency in his voice sent a rush of cold through my arms. Tenants whispered behind their doors, and the building felt like it was vibrating with fear. That was the moment I decided I could not pretend this was a small problem anymore. Something dangerous was happening, and I was stuck in the middle of it with no answers. When Darvin shouted in the hallway, something inside me snapped into a clearer focus. I was tired of standing alone in my apartment, waiting for answers that were not coming. Fear had been controlling every decision I made that morning, and for a moment, I hated how powerless it made me feel. I took a deep breath, grabbed my house keys, and stepped into the hallway. The air felt different out there, heavier and warmer, like everyone's worry had collected in the space between the doors. Several neighbors peeked out as they heard me walk by, their eyes wide, as if they wondered why I had the courage to move when they did not. Maybe I did not, but I knew I needed to understand what was happening before my own panic swallowed me whole. I walked downstairs, gripping the rail tightly because my legs felt weak. When I reached the lobby, I saw Darvin standing by the front door with his arms crossed. His fingers were tapping against his elbow, a nervous habit I had never seen from him. He turned sharply when he heard my footsteps. "What is going on?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "You told me not to drink the water. You told us to stay inside. Tell me why." He rubbed his hands together and looked toward the street before answering. "My brother works at the water treatment center on the west side," he said. "He called me early this morning and told me something is wrong with the supply. He said the contamination is serious. He told me to keep everyone safe until the city releases information." He paused, then added, "He sounded scared in a way I have never heard before." Hearing that explanation hit me harder than I expected. It was no longer a strange guess or a landlord overreacting. It was a real warning from someone inside the system. For a second, I felt dizzy, like the ground shifted under me. I asked him if we should leave the building, but he shook his head sharply. "No, the city is working on it. Officials will come through soon with directions. Stay inside until they tell us what to do." The seriousness in his voice left no room for argument. I stepped back from him and looked out the glass door. A city truck with flashing lights had parked half a block down. 3 workers wearing reflective vests were moving equipment from the back. That sight made the situation feel painfully real. I thanked him and went back upstairs, walking slower this time because my thoughts were spinning. For so long I had been told by my family that I worry too much. But this situation proved that not all fear is imagined. Some warnings deserve to be believed. When I reached my apartment, I grabbed the small case of bottled water I had stored in the pantry for emergencies. I filled a pot with it so I could at least boil eggs later if I needed to. I searched every cabinet for supplies. My hands were shaking, but my mind had snapped into a more responsible pace. I grabbed my first aid kit, a flashlight, a battery pack for my phone, and placed everything on the table. It felt strange preparing for something I still did not fully understand, but my instincts told me I needed to be ready. I called my mother again. This time she answered, and she sounded annoyed at first until she heard the tremor in my voice. "Mom, please stop using the tap water. I am not being dramatic. Something is happening," I told her. She went silent for a moment, and I could hear her breath catch before she agreed to listen. That small shift meant more to me than I expected. My sister texted again asking why I sounded so stressed. So I replied with a short message, telling her that police and city workers were already in the area. She finally stopped making jokes and asked if I was safe. Even that small change meant something. At 9:05 a.m., the building felt too quiet. I kept looking through the peephole because I expected more noise or more warnings, but the hallway stayed still. I decided to stand by the window in my living room. From there, I could see more city workers arriving, this time blocking part of the road. One of them carried a device that looked like a sensor. Another worker pointed toward the water line running under the street. As I watched them work, I felt the tension climb higher in my chest. They moved with urgency, and their faces were tight with concern. Every minute felt longer than the last. I kept glancing at my phone because I knew an alert was coming. I could feel it. The entire morning had been building toward something, a moment where everything would finally click into place. I held my phone in my hand, standing by the window with the bottled water beside me and the emergency kit on the table. I felt like I was suspended between fear and understanding, waiting for the truth to arrive. And when the clock turned to 9:10, the distant sirens grew louder, as if the city itself was inhaling before delivering the news that would change everything. At exactly 9:14 a.m., my phone vibrated so hard in my hand that I nearly dropped it. A sharp tone blasted through the apartment, and for a split second I froze, because the sound felt different from a normal notification. It carried urgency, pressure, and a force that seemed to reach straight into my chest. I looked down and saw the words filling my screen in bright red. The city had issued an immediate emergency alert. The message was direct and terrifying. Do not drink tap water. Do not filter it. Do not boil it. And do not use it for any purpose. I read it twice because I needed my mind to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The alert explained that a malfunction in the water treatment system had allowed a dangerous chemical concentration into the municipal supply. It said exposure could cause severe neurological symptoms, and anyone who had already consumed the water should seek medical help. My entire body turned cold. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, pounding so hard it made my ears ring. For a moment, I could not move. I just stood there staring at the words, understanding that everything I feared was not only real, but worse than I imagined. As soon as the alert ended, the building erupted with noise. I heard someone crying through the wall on my left. A door slammed upstairs. A child yelled for his mother. Another phone rang with an emergency message in Spanish. Fear spread through the building like a rush of heat. My neighbor Janet knocked on my door again, but this time her voice cracked when she called my name. When I opened the door, she was shaking, her hands gripping her sweater tightly. "Nora," she whispered, "I drank a full glass at 5 this morning." The panic in her eyes made my stomach twist. She looked pale and frightened, and her bottom lip trembled as she tried to catch her breath. I grabbed her arm and helped her sit down on the chair inside my apartment. My own fear was rising fast, but I forced myself to stay calm enough to help her. I asked her if she felt dizzy or sick, and she shook her head, but her breathing was unsteady. I called the city hotline listed in the alert. The line was jammed, but after several attempts, a recorded message explained where nearby medical teams were setting up. They urged anyone who drank the water to get checked immediately. I hung up and turned to Janet, telling her we needed to get her downstairs as soon as the officials reached our street. She nodded, gripping my hand tightly. The helpless look on her face made me angry at the situation. No one should have to fear something as simple as a glass of water. I kept glancing toward the window to check when emergency teams would reach our building. The sound of more sirens filled the air, this time louder and closer. When I looked outside, I saw several city vehicles pulling up, along with paramedics carrying equipment. They moved quickly, shouting instructions at each other as they prepared to go door to door. My phone buzzed again. It was my mother. Her voice shook as she asked, "Is this really serious?" I could hear panic rising in her tone, and I hated that she had brushed off my warning earlier. "Mom, please listen to me," I said. "Do not drink the water. Pour out anything you already used. Go buy bottled water until the city clears the supply." She started to say she had boiled some water earlier for tea, but I cut her off because the alert said boiling made it more dangerous. She went silent, then whispered, "Thank you for calling again. I would not have known." The fear in her voice was the kind that could only come from realizing how close she had been to danger. For the first time in a long while, she took me seriously. My sister texted next, finally asking if she should take their kids to urgent care. I told her to go immediately if they drank even a small amount. As I hung up, paramedics entered my building. They shouted for anyone who consumed tap water that morning to come forward. I helped Janet stand up and walk toward them. Her hand squeezed mine the entire way. When the paramedic asked who drank the water, Janet raised her hand with a trembling breath. They guided her outside and helped her into an ambulance for immediate screening. Watching her go inside hit me with a wave of emotion. If I had ignored the warning or brushed it off like everyone else, she would have been facing this alone. The reality of what could have happened made my knees feel weak. As I stood on the sidewalk with the cold air hitting my face, the truth settled deeply inside me. My landlord's warning saved my life, and I finally understood how close I had come to a disaster that could have changed everything forever. The hours after Janet was taken into the ambulance felt unreal, like the world had slipped into a different version of itself without warning. I stood outside the building for a long time, watching paramedics move from person to person, while city officials worked on securing the street and checking water lines. The cold air bit at my fingers, but I barely noticed because my mind kept replaying the morning from the moment I woke up. I kept thinking about how easily everything could have gone another way. If I had been tired enough to ignore the knock, if I had taken even one sip from the tap, if I had not listened to my instincts, my day would have looked very different. That thought stayed heavy in my chest as I walked back inside. The building felt shaken. People were standing in groups in the hallways and staircases, sharing their fears and asking questions no one had answers to. Strangers who barely said hello to each other were now talking like longtime friends, because fear has a way of turning walls into doors. I checked my phone and saw more missed calls from my mother. When I called her back, she sounded shaken in a way I had never heard. She admitted she had taken a sip of boiled water earlier and felt sick to her stomach from worry. I told her to head to the nearest hospital station the city set up for screenings. She hesitated at first, embarrassed for brushing me off, but then said, "Thank you for insisting. You probably saved me." Hearing that from her felt strange. For years, whenever I expressed concern about anything, she would laugh gently and say I was overthinking. But today, she treated my words like they mattered. My sister texted too, saying she cleaned out all their water bottles and took the kids for evaluations just to be safe. She sent me a photo of the waiting area and wrote, "You were right this time." That message was simple, but it made something inside me unclench. For once, my warnings were not dismissed. As the day went on, more information came in from the officials camped out on our street. They explained that a chemical imbalance in the treatment plant had gone undetected during the night shift. A technician caught it early that morning, but by then, contaminated water had already reached several neighborhoods. Hearing that made me think of Darwin again. His brother must have been the technician who discovered it. It made sense now why he ran door to door before sunrise. He tried to protect us, because he knew how dangerous the situation was. I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt. I had always thought of him as the quiet landlord who avoided conversation, but that morning he became the one person who stepped up before anyone else. When I saw him in the lobby later, his shoulders looked less tense, but his eyes were tired. I walked up and said, "Thank you for warning me. You probably saved a lot of people today." He nodded and said, "I just did what anyone should do." I knew he was being modest. Not everyone would have acted that quickly. As the evening settled in, the city blocked off the water lines and set up large stations handing out bottled water. Neighbors who had never spoken before stood in line together, trading stories about their morning and checking on each other like they had been friends for years. I helped a mother carry several cases to her car, and she hugged me afterward, telling me she wished more people looked out for each other the way my landlord did. When I got back to my apartment, I checked on every neighbor on my floor, especially the elderly tenants who might not have understood the alert. Each door I knocked on felt like a step towards something I had always avoided: connection. Moving into this building had made me feel isolated, but today showed me how quickly people can come together when they are forced to rely on one another. Later that night, I finally sat down in the quiet of my apartment and let everything hit me. My nerves, the fear, the uncertainty, the rush of responsibility, and the strange feeling of pride that I had acted when it mattered. I realized something important. I had spent years believing that my instincts were nothing but anxiety. My father had treated every warning I ever gave like an overreaction. My sister had teased me for worrying too much. I had absorbed their voices so deeply that I stopped trusting myself, but today proved something different. My instincts helped protect me, helped protect others, and helped my family avoid real danger. I finally allowed myself to feel strong instead of ashamed. I learned that listening to yourself is not foolish or dramatic. It is necessary. Before going to sleep, I called the hospital to check on Janet. A nurse told me she was stable and being monitored. Relief washed over me. I promised myself that I would visit her the next day. When I hung up, I looked around my small apartment with a new sense of understanding. This place had always felt like a temporary escape from my old life, but now it felt like a space where I had grown braver than I ever realized. The morning started with fear, but it ended with a truth I needed to hear. I was not weak. I was not dramatic. I was someone who paid attention, and sometimes paying attention saves lives. If you are enjoying the story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from.